Hey love, thanks so much for dropping into Time in the Studio today, where we dig into creativity and healing and provide tools to support your soul to become the most radiant version of yourself. I'm your host, Sarah Marie Miller, artist, herbalist, helper, and podcaster in Boulder, Colorado. And I love chatting with earth and heart-centered creatives and sharing these conversations with you. Have you ever heard someone speak and you could feel your brain firing off neurons left and right, making connections and just going wild with excitement? That person is just saying something you know you need to pay attention to. That was my reaction to an artist talk given about 9 years ago by today's artist, Katerina Lanfranco. And she helped spark my curiosity regarding the connection between nature and art, which eventually led me to start this podcast. So, gold star for sparking this fire, and a reminder that you never know what impact your actions will have on the future. You can check out Katerina's work. It's currently up in 2 exhibitions in New York, one at the Nancy Hoffman Gallery and another at the Sweet Lorraine Gallery in New York City. Both beautiful spaces. What is her work all about? Here's a little clip from her artist statement. At the core of my art practice is the act of exploring aspects of nature, science, and fantasy. I collect, organize, and recombine images and objects from nature and everyday life. I make art as a way to ask questions about the world that I live in. How do I make the invisible visible? At what point does fantasy become reality? How is our concept of nature a cultural construct? What can we learn from natural forms, cycles, and rhythms? My work explores geometry and patterns found in nature combined with portraiture and landscape painting that explore emotions and psychology. We discuss her most recent body of work that was made during this wild time of 2020 and how it was an experience of working through the experience rather than around it, and just kind of deals with the emotional aspects of the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement and carries many messages of this time. Who is this magical maker and teacher? A little bit more about her, and this comes from her website. Katerina Lanfranco is a New York City-based artist who lives and works in Brooklyn, New York, where she makes paintings, drawings, mixed media work, and sculptures. She was born in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and spent her early childhood in Berlin, Germany. As a teenager, she lived in Bangalore, India, and she earned her BA in art and in visual theory and museum studies from UC Santa Cruz, and her MFA in studio art and painting from Hunter College, City University of New York. Her work is in permanent collections of the Museum of Modern Art, where she's also taught classes, and the Museum of Prints and Drawings in Berlin, and the Corning Museum of Glass. Her work has been represented by the Nancy Hoffman Gallery since 2006, and her work has been exhibited throughout the United States and internationally in Toronto, Canada, Berlin, Germany, internationally in Toronto, Canada, Berlin, Germany, Milan, Italy, and Kyoto, Japan. Katerina founded the Rhombus Space Gallery in 2013 and was chief curator at Trestle Gallery from 2015 to 2018. She was on the advisory board for the gallery. Her work has also been reviewed in Art News, Art Info, and the New York Times. And I just want to dive into this interview. I have a couple announcements for you at the end of the episode today. Okay, I'll just give you a little hint. So I'm taking the month of December off. I'm working on a book project and developing a product line. So I'm just going to take a month away to be a little bit of a hermit, but the podcast will be back. So just so you know, you can prepare for that. I'm sure you'll be fine, but you can always connect with me on Instagram or via my website if you want to. Okay, so let's just dive in. Here we go. Cha-cha-cha. I just like to do a really brief grounding, just feeling really centered and rooted, as though your roots are going down and out in all directions, and just feeling yourself surrounded by a circle of gold energy washing over you, releasing anything that does not belong, and bringing in new revitalizing energy, and just encouraging and inviting any helping spirits, animals, or plants, or ancestors, or guides of the highest vibrations of love and light to help bring forward any messages, healings, or blessings relevant for this time, and for this to reach the ears of anyone it's meant to hear this. I am so honored and delighted to have on the podcast today Katerina Lanfranco. Thank you so much, Katerina, for being here. You're an amazing artist. I was really inspired by an artist talk that you did in Tennessee, maybe around 10 years ago or something now.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah. But I loved your work. And I remember actually you planted this seed of the idea of nature and art joining together, and that connection being really important and pivotal. And there's so much in that. And I feel like that planted the seed for the podcast in some ways, like you and yeah. So it was an amazing talk.
And that's to say.
Oh, yeah. And I love your work. And I know you have an exhibition that you just recently installed in New York. And I'm just so excited to dive in and hear where you're at and how things are going, how your work is unfolding in current time, and just to dig in. So thank you so much, Katerina, for making time today.
Of course, my pleasure. And thank you for having me. I really love your opening kind of meditation or ritual that you have at the beginning of the podcast. It's really poetic and soothing, and it is grounding. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for letting me share this. And I think the idea of, hoping that the people who need to hear this or be engaged with it find it is a really lovely way to think about how, as creators, we make things and we never know how it's going to be received or who sees it or how they experience it. And that's kind of a mystifying part of the creative process, but also really surprising. So when you said that my discussion about the relationship of nature and art, especially in my work and kind of things that I've seen, might have helped with the planting or the germination of the seed of time in the studio, I feel really honored and surprised, but in a way, like, it explains why when I saw it come into, when I saw the emails and listened to the podcast, it really resonated. I was like, oh, this is great. I love the model. I love how you include haikus and little phrases and thoughtful reminders. And one of the things that came up in my mind while you were doing the opening ritual is the idea of like a holistic approach, and considering spiritual, ancestral, body, sort of physical, mental, the breath, like it just feels very all-encompassing, like a certain open, big awareness. So yeah, I have a show up right now called Nature Poems at Sweet Lorraine Gallery in Brooklyn, New York. And then I have 7 paintings that are in a show in Chelsea at the Nancy Hoffman Gallery. And that show, called From Prayers to Urns, that opens tomorrow and is on view through the end of December. The show in Brooklyn is on view through the end of this month. And it's been interesting. Both shows deal a lot with issues of making work in the pandemic, during quarantine, responding to the coronavirus, and like just the kind of hectic, chaotic, contemporary moment. And it's also interesting because the way people engage with it has totally shifted. So yesterday we had our official kind of artist reception at the gallery, and I had so many devices going on at once, trying to capture it through Instagram, through Facebook, Zoom, and it's a little overwhelming. Like, it's a little kind of, you don't know which way to look. You don't know who's listening or what's resonating. And I feel like it's very much how the time is, like how we live in this time, or we're not sure where to look. So I look at the New York Times, so then I'll look at Fox News, and I'll look at, the BBC to make sure to see like what's really happening. There's just all these conflicting perspectives that collectively you can kind of comb through and get some like truth out of, So the work started in the new year, and I think this happens to a lot of artists, that we make things that are prescient, or they come into being, like they get realized in a lived reality later. So for instance, I was really fascinated by the power of nature in early grad school, and I was making paintings about hurricanes and earthquakes and tornadoes. And then, like, while I was working on the series, then Hurricane Katrina happened, And at that time I was going by both Katrina and Katerina. And it was like right before it happened, I was in like this, like, I get along really well with my brother, but we were having this little feud, and he was like, "You're like a hurricane. You come in here and you just move everything around." And like a week later, Hurricane Katrina came, So for these works, I was making them on this dark ground, and I really wanted them to be like this fierce expression of nature. I've looked at natural history, I've looked at botanical illustration, I've looked at like paper, Scherenschnitte, which is like paper cutouts of plants. I've looked at genetic engineering and splicing. I've looked at a lot of different sort of ways of engaging with nature, but it's often representative. And this way, for this series, or like symbolic or spiritual, this way, I wanted to go past representation to the feeling of embodying, like the visceral, the physical, the sort of intensity of like natural forces. So I was working on these pieces, and so there's much more abstraction in them, though they're filled with recognizable forms as well. But I just kind of wanted to throw everything at the canvas within my range. I wasn't throwing plates like Julian Snavell, but I was, like ripping up old clothes and saturating with paint and spray painting and using stencils, making my own stencils, using like branches and leaves and weeds to make my own stencils, and I print them and use sand. It was really intense. It was like I'd be sweating. I'd my like gas mask on, sweating in the spray booth room, and then taking it back and forth from studio and like working into the layers. And what I wanted to do, I wanted to capture the sort of chaos of life, like some artists, we make things like, I always think of Agnes Martin, where she makes these like very serene, repetitive process paintings, right? And what I wanted to do is I didn't want to separate myself from my experience. I wanted to just like kind of let it all hang out, and then still work with the painting until I could harmonize it, until I could find a resolved form or balance, and basically, bring it into harmony, force it into a kind of resolution while honoring the chaos, So, and what happened was that the pandemic happened and New York became the epicenter, and that was really stressful. And my husband got sick, and he's recovered from coronavirus. But he was like one of the first people I knew or around, because he works in healthcare. And so it was like really very stressful time.
Yeah.
And so, I went back into studio and continued these paintings and like after things settled down a bit, and brought resolution to them. But I realized afterwards, like I brought them when I was bringing them to Nancy Hoffman at the gallery, they're like, these pieces of fabric in there look like they could be masks. Like they're the same size as masks, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. It totally feels like these things that are now part of our new normal. Like it feels weird to be outside and someone isn't wearing a mask, at least here, in Brooklyn and New York, that like I've never put fabric like that, into my paintings. And here they are, like the exact size. And, the works a lot of them have like a floating composition, which feel like it's some sort of airborne molecular. One of the pieces I call miasma, and that means like black air, dark air, and it's just like these sort of floating dark orbs. And it's my dealer pointed it out to me. She's like, oh, you're really exploring like this combination of like the abject or the ugly and the beautiful. But the beautiful wins in the end, but it's like reconciling the tension and strife and anxiety that's around, so I just felt like, instead of, sometimes when you're experiencing or living through challenges or stresses, sometimes it's fine to go around it, but I just wanted to go through it, into the belly of it. And and it's really scary and liberating to make work where you're like feeling like you're destroying it as you're making it, because you can only control spray paint so much, and you can only control like glitter or dripping paints or sand so much. And so it's was really freeing, kind of exhilarating. And it was interesting. I had right before, like the end of February, right before it all got locked down and the paintings were in progress, I had this big studio visit with a bunch of artists that came, and they're like, wow, these are so like forceful and intense. And they hadn't gotten through the next stage of being resolved, or like this, slow down oil painting step. But I just think it's interesting because it's like, it was in response, but it was like while it was brewing before it came full force. And then, for instance, like I made this one painting that I struggled with so much. And it bothered me, but it was beautiful and ugly. And it was like it looks like these floral forms, but kind of spindly fingers gripping spheres, and a kind of weird garden. So I was like, I'm going to call it Rose Garden to kind of soften the intensity. And like the next day, there was like this whole, the next day or so, there was this whole thing about like the Rose Garden super spreader event at the White House. And I was like, this was supposed to be a neutral title. And suddenly it's like referring to something that shortly afterwards comes out as like a trigger point in politics, in the coronavirus management, so it's, to me, it's a very intense body of work, but still investigates that relationship of art and nature. Yeah.
It's so exciting. I really love the new body of work, and I can just feel how it is like going through, it's like when you talked about going through the pain rather than around it, it feels like addressing it head on. It's just like this, it kind of just reminds me of these guts. There's this intensity of, we're just in the midst of this, and it's processing through it, kind of digesting this experience.
Absolutely.
There's just this kind of whirring, energy to it. And I also love what you're talking about, is kind of this idea of these things that are not necessarily intended to be political or intended to address anything, but everything is,
they just resonate.
And I just love this experience of letting the work move through you, because I feel like artists are such seers, and like we sometimes can feel into the future through the work that we don't even realize is happening until the work is done months later.
I had a show, Mystic Geometry, at Nancy Hoffman Gallery in 2018. And for the show, I had made this big paper cutout. And while I was working on it, I got really, really sick with shingles, and I could barely move. And I was making this form, and it was like so painful to make the form. And I was cutting it and drawing it and cutting it. And I was like, you know what? I wonder what the shingles virus looks like. I looked it up, and it was like a cross section. Like the form that I was making looked like the shingles virus. It was so crazy. It like gives me goosebumps now. Like the same kind of like, spoke. And it's not, I absolutely was not looking at viral forms for or molecular forms for the show at all. Like I was looking at, spirals and seashells, and I was looking at gemstones, and I was looking at platonic solids and geometry and math. But yeah, it's so crazy when that happens. But it's, for a long time, artists were considered as conduits, or, that they filtered experience. And so I think it is accurate. I think we are like these kind of vessels or filtration systems for experience, and in a way that's really raw and honest, or can be, because we don't have an agenda, right? Sometimes there's an agenda of like, you have a certain perception of who you are as an artist, and so whether it falls in and out of your or your style, that might come up. But it's not like I'm not trying to sell anybody a car or toilet paper or a hamburger or something. So like, you know what I mean? Like it is what it is. It's like, okay, well, here, welcome. Like, let me get to know you now. So sometimes I wish it didn't come out that way, but it does. And I find it really revealing of something that I'm going through or that's happening culturally, and it's kind of reassuring. So
I feel like it's kind of, I just read a newsletter recently, and they were just talking about how right now is this moment where like, it's kind of like when you go into your closet to clean it out and you have to take everything out and throw it in the middle of the floor. And right now everything's in the middle of the floor, and we all have to like analyze, like, do we want this here? Does this belong here? Where does this belong? And everything's just kind of being restructured and reorganized. And I can see that in this new body of work that you created, where it's just like there is just this kind of chaos and this storm of energy, and it just feels like right now it just feels like chaotic, and I don't sometimes know what to do with myself or how to direct myself. And that kind of makes me think, I'm curious about your process in the studio. Like, do you go in kind of with a specific vision of what you want to accomplish, or do you just show up and see what happens, or do you have like a theme that you're working around? I'm kind of curious how your different series and shows kind of evolve together.
They kind of like ping pong from one show to the next. Like the next show, there's like a germination before the first show. The current show is done. There's like a seed that gets planted for the next one. And then there's also sometimes return, like a return to something that I thought I had really exhausted, but then it's sort of refreshed in my mind. It's a lot of circles, a lot of circling back. And I have a few more larger paintings that work into this theme of nature poems that I want to finish. But my routine, I come in, I check on my plants. I have some air plants and some other potted plants. I make tea. Sometimes like I'll have a little votive candle. I have mists. I have like a lot of things to make myself comfortable. And for a while I didn't have a windowed space, and finally I talked to the manager like a couple years ago. I was like, I am going to like shrivel up if I don't have like sunlight or have a sense of day. Like some people are totally fine working that way, so I feel really fortunate for that. But in terms like oftentimes like in terms of new bodies of work, I'll experiment with something or think like I can't do it, and then I'll try it. I recognize if I've put in a wall or a barrier or a limit that's self-imposed, and then be like, well, what if I do that after all? So my last shows last year, I had Talk to the Moon, where I was really exploring this idea of like these female goddess like nature archetypes. And I was trying to really think about like where the body and nature blend together, and just the link between the feminine, the divine feminine. And then that followed up with this show called Shadow Light, which was really about like partnership and duality and complements and, you know, contrasting elements that work together, complement in a complementary way. But for that show, I wrote a bunch of poems. They weren't for the titles, but they were, you know, at the opening, I read the poems. I was like, oh, I guess I write poems now. Like I'd written poems before. So this time I felt like I have been writing poems in studio. Like I have a book for poems, I have a journal book, I have a sketchbook, like I have different areas.
Yeah.
But I felt like the work feels like poem because it's like intense and direct and like hits you in the gut, but indirect, like also a little bit symbolic or metaphoric, or like it's like poetry is so wonderful because you don't have to spell everything out. You know, it's very evocative, and there's some mystery to it, and things are a little bit hidden or like shifted. So that's what kind of brought me to this notion for this show. But there's a piece in my studio that didn't fit into the show, but I also wanted to like let it percolate a little longer. And it feels really like buoyant, optimistic, hopeful. Like it's much more chromatic. It's really wild still. Like things are coexisting that don't necessarily belong together, but it feels great. It's almost like the wildness of the nature poems has come into like is now like comfortably, you know, it's like catching a wave and riding it out a little bit, you know?
Well, I love that idea of just that transition and kind of, yeah, it does. I'm hoping we're rounding it. Oh, it's just kind of maddening and terrifying, just the politics right now. And yeah, I like that idea of riding the wave and there being hope on the other side. So
yeah. And you know what it is too? I think the riding the wave, I've never used that metaphor before, but I think it's like you're working with the elements. Things are like coordinated and harmonized, you know, around you to support your energy. Like you don't have to fight through it. So yeah,
I feel like there's definitely so much in that, and just like being in the flow, like finding your flow and just letting things
finding your footing and being in the flow. Absolutely. Yeah. And I just learned how to surf in January, or like at end of December.
Oh, that's awesome. How was that? Where did you learn to surf?
Oh, it was in Costa Rica. It was so amazing. It was like, you know, I went to UC Santa Cruz for my undergrad, and basically the first day I get to California, my brother picks me up at the airport. Like we don't even go to the college or my dorm. We go straight to like a used sporting goods place to get a wetsuit and a boogie board and go out into the water. Like I haven't even been, you know, I haven't even gotten settled. I get into the water and I'm like, oh, you know, there's some swimmers over there. And my brother's like, no, those are seals. And I was like, okay. But anyways, in Santa Cruz, like you're either a skater or a surfer, kind of in the culture of the town. And I was neither, but I hung out with surfers and skaters, and it was kind of like if you hadn't already like done it, it was hard to kind of jump on it, you know? So, but I was like, you know, I'm gonna learn it. I don't know. I think both in terms of my artistic practice, I'm constantly trying different materials and like broadening my ability to use, you know, tools, techniques, and materials. And you were saying before the interview that you had researched the mic on YouTube, and I feel like if you're open-minded, like why not? Like you can learn and expand. And so I just feel like, okay, I'm a pretty good learner, so I can just learn this too.
I can see that, just that exploration and just really kind of like reaching out and trying all these different things. And you did a YouTube channel and just having all these different bodies of work and exhibiting in different places. I'm curious, just kind of thinking about your YouTube channel, what inspired you to spark that? What was that experience like?
I'm trying to remember. I think, you know, when I was running this gallery space called Rhombus Space, I was recording all the shows. I have a little bit of a backlog of videos. I have a lot of like accounts and passwords and videos and photos. Like I just it it's hard to be so interested, curious, and engaged, but then also be really organized about it at the same time. So with YouTube, I wanted to like review shows and do tutorials. Oh, I think really the start of it happened when I was hired at the MoMA to do the collage course that
Oh,
was an instructor led initially and then self led. And then it was given, all around the world. I had students all around the world. And I got like the first video I had to do was I had to compare a Braque and a Picasso Cubist painting. And I was so nervous. The whole museum was closed. There was a film crew. There was me. There was like my supervisor and like an intern or two who was like, "You've got this, pick up your energy, and I had a script and I have no ability to memorize words at all. And so I figured out, I'm like, okay, like you have a good opener, you have your 3 points, talk about form and content, and have a good closer. So I sort of figured it out. And I think that it was easy to translate that to a YouTube channel. And then Hunter College hired me to do some instructional videos for canvas priming and gessoing. And those videos have had a lot of views and they got really interesting, unusual, and strange comments. A lot of thankful comments, but then like, so, the internet is a weird place. Yeah, I mean, they're friendly, but I don't even know. People like just, they're in their own world and their world like kind of overlaps with my world, but it's like really different realities. There's just this like momentary overlap. Yeah, so I've enjoyed it. And I like the fact, I like being able to, curate when the occasion presents itself, or teach, or make art, or research, or go on. Like, I like the variety.
yeah.
I think, there's different kinds of artists, and I'm definitely more of like if you have like the hedgehog or the fox metaphor, I'm much more of like a fox running around
Yeah.
or darting in different directions. But I think cumulatively, like back to the first statement, that idea of like a holistic approach, right? Like in your body, being grounded, understanding history, spirituality, theory, like a practice, like the breath practice, visualizing, all these parts. And I think it's hard to keep track of everything, but if you kind of encourage all the senses and all the parts to work together, then like you can kind of bring everything to a higher frequency and like increase your awareness and I don't know, not get like so scuffed up by the roughness of life.
Oh, I love that. I think there is something about that, just having a little bit more of a holistic kind of looking at the big picture and kind of letting things go in and out as they need to and giving
Right.
things space and rather than being really rigid or linear.
Yeah. And I think, I feel like I totally respect people who approach their creative practice that way. It's just not for me. I need to be able to like ebb and flow. And sometimes I have more energy and, I have creative doubts and I have to like be aware of my cycles and rhythms. I found I used to when I was a kid. I had this little studio set up. I didn't even really think of it as such, but it was totally
Cute.
a studio. I
Mhm.
know it was like in this kind of triangular shaped closet under some stairs to the next floor at the very back of the closet. I would go sit at this small little shelf. I'd bring in a lamp and I'd draw for like hours back there. But I'd also drag in my little tape player and listen to like books on tape.
Oh, so cute.
But now I do that too. And
Yeah.
so I'm really enjoying listening to autobiographies and memoirs recently, like a lot of female artists and female comics. They're fun to listen to, but just everyone's kind of take on the creative process and seeing how biographic experiences shape like their production or their outlook, or have been both a challenge but also like the kernel of inspiration for them. So it's interesting to still to be doing that. And then the other thing that I found out relatively recently, I used to wear a Fitbit. I don't anymore because I don't walk enough for it to really make a difference now.
Mhm.
But I would wear a Fitbit and discover that my resting heart rate would go up on the weekends, when like life and family and all these things happened. And then as soon as I went to studio and I started working, my resting heart rate would come right down.
Oh.
I was like, I was like, have I been using art as a self-soothing method? Yeah. This curator told me with my last big show in New York, she was like, your work really has a lot to do with healing. And I was like, really? And it's so funny because, sometimes I think we reject things that are really close. Like, it's kind of this, like I remember in undergraduate, my boyfriend, when I was like 19 in California, said, "Are you spiritual?" And I was like, "Absolutely not." And now like I think about that, I'm like, wow. So the same thing, the idea of like, oh, your work has like this healing quality. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
And now I'm like, yes, yeah, absolutely. Like it's like I'm seeking it out for myself, and I want to bring that out into the world. You know?
I love that. And I can see it happening in your work, and how being around, both creating it and being around it, I think is healing for you and for your audience. I think both things are nourishing, revitalizing. So I love that you're kind of like teasing that out a little bit.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
And what's so funny is that, part of the ambition of the show in like when it was, getting sort of formulated as a show, initially I was going to use the time to do a big survey, or no, a big group show, but because of coronavirus, my co-curator and I decided to do 2 simultaneous solo shows instead, reflecting the kind of social distancing and isolation, but parallel experience. And so we have the gallery split in half with like a white line in the center, these boxes that we painted white. Her name's Catherine Keltner, and she makes these beautiful meditative drawings that are really process-based. But, one of the things was the idea of being grounded, and just, it occurs to me in talking to you that the last piece that I made for the show is sort of fantastical, optimistic, floral form with all these like shapes around it, but it has this really strong, like kind of curved double elliptical base. And the sculptures that I made for the show, they're mainly plaster and wire, mixed media with paint. They're like grounded on these big pieces of rock from the Catskill. I mean, I chose those rocks because they came from a garden that I was tending while I was up there this summer. I got this like little tiny cottage cabin trailer. Yeah. Oh my God. I just needed a reprieve. I needed to be able to leave the city, just even psychologically know that I had an escape pod.
Yeah.
In case like everything burned down.
Family go with you, or was it?
I go back and forth, and I just felt like, the playgrounds were all like roped off with caution tape, and I just wanted to get the littler kids out. And my husband's work was really stressful, and so just to give him some, like his cell phone didn't work up there that well. He'd toggle it to mine, nice. Which he needed, absolutely. I was like, this is good for you. Like, we had a fire pit and fishing and all that stuff. But yeah, the mountain that we're on is one of the most active mountains in the area. So it's like a moving mountain, which is really exciting to me. But it has these like beautiful kind of slate stones and flagstones, and the idea that the mountain moves and the stones emerge. Anyway, so I just felt like I had to bring that in. And then I brought some wood. I painted some wood for a mobile and this other sculpture that's like a little staff. So yeah, I think, Yeah, it's like, here's a big stone.
A big rock. I'm curious. So it was kind of was it a collaborative show, or was kind of like reflecting each other's work in some way, or how was the
It's interesting. Yeah, our work is so different. We found a couple pieces that like look good together on a press release or on a card, and I designed these cards that were large and super long, so with a blue line in the middle, but you can cut them. So they're two individual cards. If
Oh,
you flip
cool.
them, they have, the text is aligned with the photos, so it's in reverse order on the flip side. So we were going to co-curate a show called actually Nature Meditations. And what happens is we separated the show and it became nature poems and quarantine meditations, which I thought was really interesting. This like outcropping of the actual words. And, we had a bunch of artists that we were both going to bring in for this. But then we were like, do we cancel the show? Like, this is going to be a nightmare logistically. Like, we're not going to be able to have people in here and the moving and the transport. And we're just like, okay, why don't we change the mode and like let it be a reflection of what we've been working on and show the sort of parallel. So we pretty much split the gallery in half. It's a long gallery, but it's more about, the fact that we are friends too, but that, we didn't see each other, but we're able to stay in touch remotely and organize it. And what's interesting is the work it's kind of complementary in its opposite way. There's a lot of blues in the show, which maybe
Yeah.
mine's definitely heavier. Hers is definitely lighter. Hers is cooler. Mine's more emotional. Hers is more restrained. Mine's more intense. But the collaborative process of like supporting each other and helping each other and editing each other's statements and like using Google Drive like it's our best friend, shit, just divvying up tasks, like the partnership that went into it feels so great, like we divvied up tasks and like support each other doing things and like helping each other like with outreach and like getting the word out. And I just think, so it was collaborative in spirit, not necessarily in what the work was, but maybe what it represented. We were both finding solace in our work, using it as a way to insulate ourselves from the tension, but also as a way to process it. And we just processed it in our own ways. So in a way, it's kind of, it functions in a collaborative way by being points of juxtaposition or contrast.
Yeah, I think that's helpful just to see different ways of kind of moving through this time and working together. And I love that exchange and the way that you can kind of use technology and use Google Drive
Oh yeah,
collaborate on stuff within that. It seems really fun.
So we're gonna have. I did an artist talk, which was Instagram Live today, and it's on my Instagram account. And then the second part of the artist talk I did in my studio, and I turned on my Facebook Live. So part of it is on Facebook, but the whole thing is on Instagram.
Oh, cool.
And we're gonna have meditations, like mind body meditation, grounding meditations. And then we're also going to do like Zoom gallery hours. And like, she's doing a couple of days a week. I'm doing a couple of days a week. We may like pop into each other's Zoom.
Oh,
so it's funny because it's like we're basically adhering to social distancing, but working collaboratively. It's almost like we're navigating what it means to be colleagues, friends, coworkers, during this time where we have to be separate at the same time.
Yeah.
So yesterday when all this digital technology was going and like we didn't know which like camera to look at, and I felt like we weren't alone in trying to figure all this stuff out, which was really nice. And I think that's when, like, also what you said before we started, like that Zoom gives you an opportunity to really connect with people. Because you get to, you get to see all the visual body language and, the environment that they're in. It kind of adds to a sense of, what's actually happening. It's not like this disembodied voice across, even though hello to the podcast sphere.
Yeah, I love
but yeah, we're both very visual people, and so like luckily one of the benefits from the internet is that you can just go ahead and Google something or check something or link something. So you can sort of flesh it out in a more holistic way, even though it's not an in real life experience. So yeah, so that was really great. And it's interesting because it is this collaborative effort, but we're both showcasing our own work separately. So it's not like a direct intermixed dialogue, but sort of honoring each of our own sort of quarantine experiences. Like initially we were thinking, do we hang like plastic between,
Right, some sort of division.
Yeah, I actually had chairs with these painted thin long boxes stacked, and my kids came into the gallery while I was finishing the install. They're like, we love everything except for that weird sculpture in the middle of the room. And I realized that I had to retool it a little bit so it wouldn't, the division was visible, but it didn't interrupt the aesthetic experience of the work. So that was interesting.
Oh, that's cool. That would be fun to have their perspective, I imagine. Do you feel like completely inspired by them all the time, or do they give you
my God, all the time. And I'm hoping it's mutual. So for mystic geometry, my son Luca would make these drawings on those etch a sketch, but like the magnetic ones where you have a pen, boards in the car. I just had all this drawing stuff in the car all the time. And so he'd make these drawings and I'd say, hey, Luca, can I borrow that design, that composition, like as like a basic, basis for another piece. And I want to say also, for mystic geometry, I was doing abstraction, but not the sort of visceral, expressive abstraction. And then, so when I was finishing hanging the show, I had a few pieces. I had to figure out like placement for some pieces, and he helped me. He'd like hold up a piece. I'd hold up a piece. He'd give me his impression. Like, is it too high, too low? What should be on what side? And very thoughtful comments. I brought him actually to Ria's studio visit when he was about 3 years old. He might have been like 2.5, 3 years old. And during critique, it was like a big group studio visit. During like, not the critique, but the like feedback part of it, he had opinions about her work. He gave her feedback. Yeah, because like that one kind of looks like a tiger. I think that's one of the things he said. But I actually brought him now that I remember this, I was teaching at Fordham University, and he had just learned how to walk. He had just learned. So he was like, a year-ish. It was very small, maybe a little less than a year. And I had him and I was holding him during critique. I only brought him once, but I was holding him during critique, and he started speaking over me in babble. So I put him down, and the whole class had their chairs facing like the two critique walls. And he goes over to my yellow pad of paper where I have like the class outline, and he starts stomping. My students said that it was like their favorite class the whole semester. So it was not, it worked. But I just remember thinking like, wow, this person really like has.
He's an artist.
He's such an artist. He was also born a middle-aged man. So yeah, meanwhile, my daughter was totally born a teenager. And she comes in and she's like, okay, so let's count how many paintings in here are yours and how many are mine. She'll be like, it's not fair. You get to use all the glitter. So she will come and make pieces. And so not last time, but the time before, she came in and she's like, oh, you put away the painting with that jellyfish that I love. I'm going to make my own version of it because I miss it so much. Or when I was installing and my son was in the gallery with me helping, she went and she made her own little painting, or she'd say like, oh, can we make something in the studio? You have like 1,000 materials in there, like literally 1,000. She has her own drawer.
How old are they now?
10 and 7. And she made this really interesting painting the other day where she made a very elaborate like glitter paint, and then she put a plastic glove in the middle of it.
Oh,
And I said, "Do you want me to take that glove out?" And she's like, "No, it's part of it. So you can put your hand and like be part of the painting." I was
oh,
like, "Wow, that's a really cool
oh.
idea." I know, I know. So
Kids
they, yeah.
come
Oh,
up with ideas.
and actually, she totally takes over my journals and sketchbooks. He never did that, but she does. And so I find like random drawings in there. But she made this drawing where all these flowers were connected at the root, like all these different ones.
Mm.
And that's kind of like this big painting that's going on in there now, this sort of like harmonious cohabitation of like super diverse, weird stuff.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
That's
I
amazing.
know. So yeah, no, it's for the most part, they're a treat. They can be stubborn, but I think it's fine. It's good. It's good for kids to, it's like you discover them as much as make them, right?
Mm.
Who they are. And I feel the same way about art. It's like I make the art, but I also am discovering what it wants to emerge as I'm in the studio.
It's so true. It is like a dialogue with you and the work, and it kind of
Yeah.
evolves as you continue that conversation.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, speaking of conversation, I know you have another one you have to get to shortly, but I want to just give a space if there's anything else coming through, and also how people can connect with you and connect with this exhibition or your two exhibitions that are up right now.
Yeah, sure. So I'm on Instagram at Katerina Lanfranco, and then there's my website, and then Nancy Hoffman Gallery has some work up through the end of the year, and she represents me in New York. And then I'm pretty accessible. Sometimes I wonder if I'm too accessible. I'm like posting, like I love the idea of sharing, and
Mm-hmm.
then I see other people's social media where they're like more coy or like barely share. I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, maybe I should be like that. But I'm like, that's not me.
I
I'm a
think
sharer, like communicator, sharer.
I,
Yeah. So I am like super, I'm totally available on like Facebook and Instagram. But I'm just going to honor my name and say all the letters. It's Katerina Lanf as in France, Ranco. So, yeah, so I feel like your audience would really dig the work. I
oh,
feel like it's really a good match.
I think it
Um,
definitely is. I mean, you helped spark the beginning of the podcast. So
I know, I had no idea. I
I
feel like I should get a gold star.
I didn't really put it together until we were messaging, and then I was like, wait, that like that artist talk was totally pivotal for me. Like I put so many pieces together in my brain, and I just remember figuring out listening to you talk about your work. So I love seeing your work and how it evolves, and I'm just so excited to keep witnessing the transformations. And
Likewise, likewise. I'm really enjoying what you're doing too. And I'm excited to share this.
yes,
So,
yes, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Katerina, for being here. And I'm so excited about your shows. And I think it's just such a beautiful offering and great example of how to collaborate with other people and how to have an exhibition at this point in time, because I think there is hope.
yeah.
There are ways to put your work out there and get it, let people see it. And
Yeah, yeah. And you just kind of have to like go with the flow and like this is what's available now and so be it. So, all right, thank you so much,
thank
Sarah.
you.
All
Awesome.
right, bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye, hon.
Talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please be sure to share it with a friend, or you can share it to your stories and tag me. And be sure to connect with Katerina at Katerina Lanfranco. And you can check out her exhibitions at Sweet Lorraine Gallery and at the Nancy Hoffman Gallery. You can connect with me on Instagram at Time in the Studio Podcast and connect to my newsletter at timeinthestudio.com. And I already told you my announcement. I'm such a nerd, but yeah, I'm taking December off. I'm going to work on a book project and develop my product line. And you can connect with me on Instagram and my website. And I'll be available for a limited number of tarot sessions if you're interested in a tarot session with me.
And yeah, I hope you get to enjoy the winter, enjoy the holidays, and I'll be back again next week. And then I have to look at a calendar, but then I think I will be taking, I have 2 more episodes. Yeah, 2 more episodes after this, and then I'll be taking a month off. But then I'll be back in January. And yeah, big shout out to Aaron Travers for the show music and to everyone for listening and sharing this podcast. You mean the world to me, and I'm just so thankful for the support and connections that come out of this show. It's really exciting and really invigorating. And if you love the show and you want some extra bonus goodies, you can check out my Patreon at patreon.com/timeinthestudio. A big hug and thanks to you, and lots of love, and may our efforts benefit all beings. Take care. Toodaloo.